Hey, joining us here is Andy Hazelton. He is a physical scientist at NOAA's Environmental Model Center, recently impacted by the DOGE cuts at NWS and NOAA. Thank you, Andy, for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, not the best circumstances to be chatting with you, but your experience with NOAA. What does an environmental model employee do at NOAA?
Yeah, so there's quite a few of us doing different things. My expertise is on hurricanes and hurricane modeling. That's where my background's in. So I've worked on the hurricane analysis and forecast system, HAFS, which is basically like a hurricane specific model that NOAA's been developing for the last several years that just went operational a couple of years ago. I've expanded into working on, the GFS, and people may know that as like the American model, the global model, and I've looked at the hurricanes in that. Other people in my group were doing other things like, the models that are used for severe weather, the regional models and things like that. So, our agency does, all sorts of the numerical weather prediction within NOAA.
And you were recently let go, which is, as a member of the weather community, I don't like seeing the workforce shrink in that regard. But what are some of the other, the other aspects, the other careers within NOAA? What other areas were impacted by the cuts?
It seemingly was across the board. There were, like I said, about 9 or 12 of us, I think, within EMC that got hit. But in the Weather Service, a lot of people were hit. So I know a lot of forecast offices were already understaffed. There were folks that I worked with at the Aircraft Operations Center, the outfit that does the reconnaissance flights into the hurricanes, which I got to do in my previous role. There were some of the site or the flight directors and maintenance people and things there that were let go. So it was really both the modeling, the observations, the forecasting, all sorts of NOAA operations or work was impacted by this.
Yeah, you were mentioning, it's mind blowing. I'm going to get a lot more into it, just how much NOAA does when you start really looking at all the pieces in play. But since you just mentioned the modeling and with your expertise in the tropical modeling in particular, I heard you mention the HAFS. The HAFS A, HAFS B, these are relatively new models that we use here to try and predict where these dangerous storms are going. How do you see these cuts affecting the future ability to model storms and improve our knowledge of how these storms are acting?
I think it's going to hurt, a lot, both in the short and long term. Because if you look at the statistics over the last 30 years, hurricane track errors and even intensity errors have started to come down a lot. We made a lot of progress, thanks in large part, better forecasting techniques, but also better modeling. That's, the team I've been on and the Hurricane Forecast Improvement Program, HFIP, that I've been a part of, they've been active for the last 15, 20 years and, really helped with a lot of these improvements, in our collaborators with universities and other agencies. But I worry that these moves risk slowing that progress and even reversing it, because there's going to be fewer people to work on the models, going to be, possibly less data going in as the data is impacted. So it's a risky move overall.
We mentioned model. I had my meteorological hat on right there when I was asking you. That was just me point blank asking how you think it's going to be impacted moving forward. To someone that isn't as familiar with how these models work, who runs them, where that data comes from, where it goes, how would you explain that to someone that maybe has, I would call it, a junior woodchuck level of meteorology with respect to these models?
Yeah, so basically a model is a computer simulation. It could be, there's different kinds, that there's statistical models, dynamical models, which is mainly what I work on. Basically, it's running a supercomputer to do a bunch of approximations to try to estimate, do a numerical simulation of what the weather's going to be, because, weather is complicated. It's not just 2 + 2 = 4. We can't exactly determine it, or we'd have a perfect prediction. So we have to do our best to approximate it. And the way that it works is you start with an initial condition, the state of the atmosphere now, and then you run it through these these computers, these approximations to produce a forecast. So my work involves, especially the approximations and the code to do that. But you also need the data that initializes the model. It starts with the atmosphere is now. So you need satellite data, you need radar data, you need surface observations, and all that gets fed into the models. And all these things are at risk with people getting cut across NOAA.
So you're saying that NOAA is providing the data that goes into all of these models that are so widely used?
That's right. Even models that aren't NOAA models use this data. So it's across the board.
Does the Euro use it? NOAA data?
Yeah, I'm sure that I don't know their exact data. What goes in, but I know they use a lot of the same data. Like the aircraft data and things like that.
You talk about the aircraft data. We mention these all the time when we've got, flights scheduled to go out and investigate these storms. Do you think that there's going to be less flights this summer if there's a pending storm out there? Do we know yet how deep the cuts are with respect to things like aircraft reconnaissance that NOAA does?
I don't know if we know the full scale yet, but I can certainly speak that I've had friends and colleagues that I've worked with. And because in my previous role in NOAA, while I was at the University of Miami, I did that. I was part of the flights, and I had several people there that got hit by this as well, including a couple of the flight directors, who are basically the meteorologists that they work with us on the science side, and they work with the pilots to both make sure the mission is carried out safely, because that's a big deal, of course, but that also the science mission is fulfilled at the same time. So they're critical, and a couple of them were let go, kind of for no reason. And I think it does risk, you might have more chance of a mission that's missed, due to maintenance or staffing and things like that, and that would just be a huge problem if you have a storm in the Gulf or the Caribbean, it's coming toward land, and that were to happen. That's a real danger.
Yeah, I think I saw someone somewhere say something about how the weather balloon launches in Alaska, they were scrubbing some of those. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh boy, I hope we don't see this happening across more offices throughout the country, because the less data we get in, it seems like the less reliable the data coming out is going to be.
Yeah, the saying is garbage in, garbage out. So, these models are only good as the data going in, and that's going to be a big problem.
So just broad scale, do you think, this is just me asking an expert in the field, do you think that this upcoming tropical season we're going to have tangible effects on model performance, or is that not a knowable thing yet?
I don't think the details are knowable yet, because there's still people that are going to work hard. I have my colleagues that are some of the smartest people in the world. They're going to work hard to try to make sure that there's no drop off. But we're already stretched thin. A lot of these forecast offices are in the same boat. We already had not enough people working on these complex problems, and so it's just going to be more and more stretching thin, and more projects that get sort of pushed off to the side, and it's going to slow that progress, and unfortunately maybe even eventually reverse it, and forecasts could get worse again.
So what do you think, just on a more broad scope, taking the forecast tropical weather hat off at this point, just on a broad level, NOAA, NWS, how do you feel personally when you see these cuts coming? And you and I both know that the service NOAA provides is a lot of times not the forefront in the public eye. They just see maybe someone like me or someone post something on some type of social media platform. But you have more of a behind the scenes look and knowledge of the inner workings of NOAA. So on that broad scope, how do you see this all playing out down the road?
Well, I just want people to know that the work we do at NOAA and the Weather Service, it really underpins a lot of the weather enterprise. And there's all sorts of great people working in our field. There's us in the government side, the private sector, whether it be TV or private companies, universities and military. We're all trying to work toward the same goal of giving people life-saving and property-saving information. But the data that NOAA uses, the models, the observations, that goes into a lot. Whether it's your weather app on your phone or the TV show you watch in the morning to get ready for the day. the data that NOAA collects underpins a lot of that. And so these cuts risk, making that less reliable, which, whether you're getting your information from NOAA's website, from your favorite local reporter, from your favorite app, it's going to make that data, that forecast less reliable.
I'm in my head over here going, oh man, I'm playing worst case scenario in my head. I feel like most humans do. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do if, the models aren't there? My first reaction is to just go and look at, a surface map with data points that you could go and draw. But then I'm thinking, okay, well, who's getting those data points? It's NOAA. And then it just starts, okay, are we going to go red sky at night, sailor's delight? How far are we going to go back?
Yeah, back to the days when you had to, wait for ships to sail in 7 days later to tell you a storm was coming, or yeah, we don't want to get back to that. And
Yeah.
this, like I said, you look at the improvements over the last 30 years, and it's pretty remarkable. And we want to continue that. We want to, there's a lot of new technology and AI and things that we're researching how we can use better. And there's certainly ways it can be more efficient and improve, but just these across the board kind of senseless cutting has been really tough.
Yeah, you're making an almost impossible job even more impossible, it seems. You brought up AI. What are when I'm thinking AI from a weather forecast point of view, I'm thinking along the lines of just a forecast model. I'm not thinking in terms of something that's able to think and reason on its own. How would you describe AI playing in to weather forecasting moving forward?
That's a great question, and actually something I was kind of in the process of starting to study because that was kind of one of my professional development goals this year in my job, my federal job before I was let go, was to become more of an expert and learn more about AI. So I got assigned as one of the writers for our roadmap for EMC or AI roadmap. What are we going to use AI for, and how are we going to do that over the next 5 or 10 years? I think you're going to see more forecasting models that are AI driven. I think we're already seeing some skill with that for large scale weather and things like that. I think it's going to be tricky to do something like hurricanes because they're such a rare event. For AI, you need what's called a training data set. You sort of need that background, knowledge. And hurricanes are rare and they're extreme, so that's tougher. But I think we'd like to build a data set that we could use for that, and that would be really exciting. But again, that's going to take a lot of data. It's going to take a lot of people, a lot of money, a lot of investment that would sort of run counter to what we're seeing right now.
It's almost like it's an exciting yet unknown road ahead of us, and we've never been down it. So it'll be also interesting
Right.
to see how that all plays out. I do have one more question. Our news
Sure.
director, Wes, may have some for you too. I said, hey, you're going to have a different lens looking at this than I am. We're just two guys talking shop over here. But one of the ones that I was really curious about, because, at the end of the day, we're trying to figure these meteorological issues and forecasts out for others. I can know all I want, and if I just keep it to myself, it does no one any good. So moving forward, if someone, has the perspective that these cuts at NOAA, the National Weather Service, whatever's going on, it doesn't matter. It's all no big deal. It's just whatever, and we're going to keep going on as we were before. What would you say to someone that maybe have that mindset?
I would say just think hard about, depending on your age and, your experience, how much weather forecasting has gotten better over the last 30 years. And, for hurricanes, back in the 70s and the 80s, we only had like 1 to 2 day track forecasts. Now we have 5 day forecasts looking at making it 7 days. That's, an extra several days that you can get ready. And that allows people to protect themselves if a storm's coming. And it's also gotten more accurate so that people that aren't in the harm's way don't need to shut down their business. And I heard a stat today that each storm, NOAA saves about $5 billion with the work we've done because of people are able to protect their property, and also because of the accuracy, that the way it's improved, people don't have to close down if they're not in harm's way. They don't have to close their schools, their businesses, and so there's all this money that's been saved. And so you talk about efficiency. We basically almost pay for ourselves in that regard. And you're going to see natural disasters are going to be costlier, because they're still going to happen regardless of what happens to NOAA. The only difference is we won't be as well prepared.
So you mean you don't control the weather over at NOAA?
No, can confirm. I wish I did because I would be very wealthy and not worried about cuts if that were the case.
That's what I say. It's above my pay grade to be able to flip the switch on and off. So glad we're able to get that one out of the way. Wes, do you have any no questions from the boss? He's given me the thumbs up over here. Andy, thank you for the time. I wish you the best moving forward. You're a very bright meteorologist. I know because I follow you. You didn't even know it, but I do. On Twitter, X, social stuff like that. And I hope you land on your feet moving forward.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.